This World Bank report doesn't really bring anything new. We know that Africans are not trading amongst themselves. The figures do bear, testimony to this. Less than 10% of intra-African trade is recorded. Whereas when you go to developed economies like Europe, for instance, you're talking double digit, you're talking the 40%, etc., etc. Why can't Africans trade amongst themselves?
Thank you very much. It's very true, actually. Statistically, if you look at the numbers across the trade across the African countries, it's been very weak. And I think we can attribute this reason to the way those economies are structured. Ordinarily, when these countries used to be colonies, they used to be doing businesses internally and report directly to whoever was their master. And therefore, when the independence came through, there was a bit of a sustenance of the same system. So there's not been enough time to look at the real issues there. And I'll tell you for a fact, not only trade, businesses, even in terms of movement of goods and services, it's easier to move goods across the continent from Africa to elsewhere than within Africa. And I think a good example in East Africa is it's easier to move human traffic through the air, for example, from Kenya to London than from Kenya to Mali, for example.
Absolutely. Even if you took a look in terms of pricing, when you look at the prices to fly from here to Kenya and then to fly from here to London, you're probably looking at prices that are almost equal. And yet distance-wise, you're talking half the distance. But if these things are so obvious, why have the politicians not started implementing measures that will increase the flow of trade across Africa?
I think one of the biggest reasons is we have never had some economic or trading blocks that have been very successful, that have been properly managed, and that have been very effective. Starting from, for example, from the SADC coming to the East African community and combining all the way to COMESA, for example, before we go to ECOWAS. If you look at these regional blocks, they are still struggling even now, trying to remove some of the trade barriers, standardization of the policies across those countries. And I think different countries have had it very, very difficult trying to see how they are going to protect their own local manufacturers, for example, as opposed to standardize and being able to bring competition at an international level. And I think because of that lack of success in implementing some of this standardization, as well as embracing competition across the globe, and across Africa, it has been the major issue. So I think the best way to do is to look at these regional blocks. For example, if the countries within SADC have an easy movement flow of goods and services, then it's going to be easier for the others which are also members of the East African community or members of the ECO on that regional trading bloc. It's going to be easier. But if, for example, Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda cannot be able to standardize the tariffs, then obviously Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda cannot trade with Zambia or South Africa. Absolutely.
Now, Donald Kaberuga, president of the African Development Bank, has come up with what I thought was a very novel suggestion. He is suggesting that Africa perhaps could begin by creating Schengen-type visas across the continent. Say, for instance, Southern Africa has got one visa, so you know that for a foreign investor coming into the region, they are looking at one visa. So a Kenyan coming into Southern Africa to go to South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, Malawi, does not need visas for all these countries, just looks at one. Why is that not practical? Part of the reason he mentioned is the lack of political will. So how do we get the politicians to begin to think beyond the national borders and their own narrow mandates?
Yeah, you're right, actually. I'm having the free flow of people, for example, can be a major breakthrough in trying to promote trans-border economy and businesses. However, as rightly mentioned, the problem now has been when the politicians come, actually, the first thing they normally look for across Africa is to try to say, we want to promote our people, we want to be able to make our people have businesses running all across. But not knowing that by doing that, you are literally saying that you want to block the next neighbor, the next door. And I think even as they become politicians and maybe ministers of trade or finance in those respective countries, they don't get to go beyond that thing of I want to help my people. And I think that is the biggest biggest undoing. So being able to allow free movement of people, like for example, having a uniform visa as suggested, I think that can be a very, very major step. Because if people can't move the way people can't move right now, obviously goods cannot move.
Yeah. Now, the World Bank is suggesting 3 things to try and improve the flow of trade between African countries. Let me just read them to you quite quickly. They're suggesting improving cross-border trade. They cite examples of poor people trying to trade between, say, countries like Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and cite the example of a woman who is trying to sell eggs in the DRC, and she is forced to pay the customs officers.
And has to give 1 egg.
Give them an egg so she could at least cross the border, so she's able to give. Ends up giving 30 eggs. That's one idea that they're talking about. And the second one is removing a range of non-tariff barriers. And then the third one is reforming regulations and immigration rules. These ideas are not new. How do we get them to work?
I think, first of all, to get them to work, we need to be able to probably educate our kind of politicians, particularly on the trade desk, on the trading and import and export. Because I think there's this notion that if, for example, you put tariffs, and therefore you're able to block sugar coming from COMESA, coming to a particular non-COMESA country, then you have really helped the local sugar manufacturers by helping them to sell at a better price than the sugar that is coming cheaply. I think that notion has been there, and that notion is now we have discovered it's wrong. So the protection of local industry, I think that should be taken aback. And then the policymakers, I think, across Africa need to wake up and realize that actually the real way to promote local businesses is to be able to have those businesses embrace competition. Because if they're able to embrace competition, they can be able to do production at a cheaper cost. And they can be able to look at economies of scale and probably even transfer and do some multi-domestic strategies where the same industry could be operating in different countries to produce the same product. And I think this innovativeness is going to come when you remove those tariff barriers, because I think that's the main biggest disadvantage you have across. Yeah,
so these are the ideas coming out of the World Bank. Would you have any other ideas in which perhaps we can try and improve trade within? I can tell you I've got one idea that would work. Remove the current leadership that we have across Africa, put in people who think about Africa as one place, and then perhaps we move forward.
Yeah, precisely. I think that's one of them, and I think that one also should be coupled with I think, I know we have a couple of elections coming through this particular year. I think the Africans themselves should be able to elect people who understand a bit of economics. Because I think other things you have proven with time that they don't help. And maybe the other thing that maybe we should start thinking of, I know it's very impossible to implement, is going to be the standardization of the currency. I'll give an example. If you take goods from Zambia, cross over to South Africa, and then take the same goods from South Africa, bring them back to Zambia, you're going to measure a huge loss, more than 30%. And that just tells you that the currency exposure, even as we're trying to do inter-country trading, is very, very high. So I think in the long term, we start by doing some political blocks. Those political blocks can transform to become economic blocks. And therefore, by doing that, the heads of those economic blocks can be able to penetrate slowly and try to change the things that are common. For example, I tell you, for example, in East Africa, a product like a commodity like maize. Maize is a commodity that's being used across East Africa. The kind of the prices you're going to see in Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and Nairobi are totally very different. But again, you cannot be able to take that product from one city to the next city, because by the time you're crossing the border, you're going to be hit by the currency fluctuation and then the currency risk. So I think we need to start by looking at those areas. I'm most likely give these regional blocks a bit of power, economic power, to be able to decide actually which type of goods and probably services can they start with to make them borderless, that they can be done across borders. And I think once we get that and the people getting to do that business, then probably the other things can follow, where the most sensitive commodities can start also flowing across the region.
Absolutely. A borderless Africa is the idea from Fred Mweni, CEO of Tsavo Securities out in Nairobi. Thank you very much indeed.